Hi, Coach Tara here, and really quickly, I want to talk to you about managing your internal environment and how important that is if you are trying to get away from a life of compulsivity. So maybe you've had some success in your recovery, and maybe you're connected locally with support groups like 12 steps. Maybe you have guards in place on your devices to help you be accountable to other people and to help you delay urges and acting out. Maybe there's a lot of things you've been doing that have helped you to extend the periods between compulsively acting out. This video is for the person who has made some progress in recovery, but still finds themselves relapsing over and over. Maybe you'll have 2 or 3 months of a dry period and then catch yourself in the compulsive cycle again. So managing your internal environment, to me, is the most important thing you can learn to have sustained success. So the success you have now is intermittent. It's not sustainable. It's what we call white knuckling it, or relying on willpower alone to get us through the next day and keep us from acting out. But chances are, if you keep acting out, your compulsive behavior, the urges are always there in the back of your mind, haunting you, following you around. So the way to do this, the way to have sustained success, is to increase your awareness, increase your internal control. And one of the ways you can do that is first and foremost by increasing your self-knowledge. You need to be able to recognize the different parts of who you are, because you are complex and there are parts of you that want something that is completely contrary to other parts of you. And I think you're probably aware of that if you're locked in compulsive behavior. So create a dialogue with yourself. You want to find out how this all began, the root of it. And you want to find out what the compulsive acting out part of you needs. So those are really important things that you need to be asking. And you need to create this internal dialogue with yourself. Journaling is also a great way to do this. Get this on paper. That's very important. You can do it on the voice record or auto record on your phone, whatever you want to do. But getting it on paper, speaking it out loud, both of those things are really important. So you can kind of make this dialogue a part of your life. To do this, you have to increase your awareness. And if you're a person who feels like you're distracted all the time, or you're constantly needing some kind of stimulation, then I absolutely recommend that you start with sitting meditation. And it doesn't have to be anything complicated at first. Just set a timer for 60 minutes and count your breaths. There's a lot of great apps out there for guided meditations as well. So check those out. There are plenty of resources available to you to help you increase your self-knowledge. So my number one tip for increasing your self-knowledge is that you need to recognize this truth. And that is that without self-knowledge, there could never be self-love. And without self-love, you will most likely always be caught up in the compulsive cycle, because you'll feel badly about yourself and you will feel segmented, you'll feel fragmented, and you'll always need to return to this numbing and coping and escaping because you don't feel whole. So the self-knowledge is the route to self-love. The second tip I have for managing your internal environment is that you need to replace your thoughts. So the most important way to change your internal environment is to change the way you think. There's a great examples of this, I'm sure, in everyone's life, but just think of a time that you've been in a room and someone in the room has showed up in a really positive way and has said very encouraging things and uplifting things, and think about how that shifts the mood in the room. Even if the people around that person are highly negative and not thinking positive thoughts, they typically cannot help but be impacted in some way by that person, even if it's just by the responses of the person next to them. So I can think of many examples of this in my life where I personally have showed up in a room intentionally being positive, intentionally being encouraging, and it's a joy to just watch the energy shift with the person you're talking with, and their eyes light up and they start to smile if they weren't before, and things like that. And I've also had experiences And just recently, I was having a conversation with a relative, and I was a little frustrated about a certain family dynamic. And so I made comments about it. And the bad part was, though, is that I expressed very negative first thoughts and first reactions and said some pretty toxic things. And it didn't take me long. It just took me, 5 seconds to say these things. And immediately I felt the shift in me, and I felt the shift in the conversation and in the other person. And I immediately regretted it. So when you're thinking about thought replacement, it's not this mystical thing. It's merely a matter of how you talk to yourself, just in the same way that you would talk to other people. So remember, this is just about having a conversation with yourself, the different parts of yourself. Again, if one part of you shows up in a highly negative, reactive, toxic way, you have the choice for this positive, life-bringing part of yourself to speak life into that situation. So the first thing you want to do is identify your most negative thoughts. When they come up, get that on paper. Maybe once a day, write down the most negative thoughts you had that day, and then write down the reframe, which means the thought you would rather have, the thought you would rather replace it with. And then you can start practicing that in the moment. When you have that thought that shows up that says, you can't help yourself, you have to act out, you can say, false. I can help myself. I do have control in this moment. I don't have to act out. So that's just one example. My number one tip for replacing your thoughts is that you can use this sentence to really help you along your way. You can speak to yourself using these words and say, quote, I am not my thoughts and urges, end quote. That's a great, just across the board way to respond. If you're in the moment, you feel caught up in this urge and this compulsive cycle, and you really want to cut to the quick of what you're thinking there, even if you can't think of anything else, just a recognition, speaking it out loud that you are not your thoughts and urges, that isn't all of who you are. There's a lot of power in that. Okay, so number 3 for controlling your internal environment is the 3-step plan, how to deal with triggers, So develop a 3-step plan for how to deal with your triggers. Willpower will never be enough. We get tired. And frankly, when it comes to breaking compulsive cycles that have brought a lot of pleasure in the moment, and seemingly when we're caught up in this cycle, they're going to be the solution for our problem, the way that we're feeling at that moment. We don't care about willpower anymore in that moment. So you have to have a plan. And this is attributed to Benjamin Franklin, whether he said it or not, I don't know. But if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Everybody's heard that. And that's just as true when it comes to managing your internal environment as it is other aspects of your life. Again, and I mentioned this before, my number one tip for your 3-step plan is that you write it out. And then if you have as part of your 3-steps plan that you're going to replace your negative thoughts, make sure that you either think it or say it out loud when you're in the moment. So if part of your 3-step plan is you recognize the trigger, possibly you would do 5 mindful breaths, and then the 3rd step would be, okay, I am not my thoughts and urges. Saying whatever you need to say to yourself at that time to replace the negative thinking out loud is really important. But get everything in writing. Speak things that you need to speak out loud in your life whenever you can. And yes, continue with getting support. Continue with having safeguards in place. But the primary thing is managing your internal environment. I would love to hear what you're doing to have a healthy recovery and to move towards a great life in the comments below. Thank you for watching.